Jackson Podcast.
I want to ask you to take a step back, please. This woman's broken into the store and vandalized me. That's how this Karen Robinson. Yeah, I've never met this woman before. You got the video, right?
Yeah.
Not gonna call the cops. Yeah, I'm fine. I saw it coming. That's what I'm saying. Get Jesse. Thank you. I just got to get out.
Get up. Let's just walk out.
What's going on with y'all today, man? Like I promised, I was going to do the debate, the pro versus the anti-reparations conversation. But before we get into that, I want to talk about what made me interested in having the conversation about Marc Lamont Hill and Coleman Hughes. So I was listening to, not reading, listening to on Audible Coleman Hill's book yesterday. And there was a lot of things in there that I felt that was very interesting and very intriguing. And sometimes you have to listen to or learn from people you disagree with. I'm one of those type of people that feel as if you can learn from an opposition, you can learn from an enemy, you can learn from a 3-year-old. So I'm not really into, at one point in time on my channel, I was talking about counseling individuals. I was part of the counsel culture, counseling individuals because they said something that I didn't like. I actually now find that weak because you can let people speak. People are humans, and you can learn from the things that they say, their behavior. You can learn from how people conduct themselves and what they really think. So let people speak because you really want to know what people really think. You truly want to know that. So Marc Lamont Hill, as I was doing my research or whatever, that clip that I just played at the intro was viral at the moment. And everybody wants to be a speaker. People like to speak to crowds, hold conferences and meetings, and they have things that where they speak at about educating folks, helping people. And he was attacked at that conference or whatever that was that he was speaking at by a lady that he probably supports. And I want to read the post that he responded to yesterday because it was interesting that he took this approach. So it's speaking to the man, who the man really is. And I'm going to play the clip for y'all. I'm fine. Everyone, the video of me being pepper sprayed was from January 2024. At the time, the attacker believed that I was part of a conspiracy along with the CIA and the president to cover up traumatic events from her childhood. Since then, after refusing to press charges, I have worked with her family and community members to enable a restorative process. Through the process, I have learned that she did indeed suffer significant childhood abuse. I'm going to keep reading, but that's crazy. Significant childhood abuse. That is, man. So, as well as serious mental health challenges that continue to this day. Instead of criminal persecution, I have done my best to make sure that she receives social and mental health support to help her heal as best as possible. So I've been knowing about Marc Lamont Hill for years, but I really never paid attention to him until he became a part of the Joe Budden podcast. I never paid attention to his work, his education, what he does talk about when he talks. I know he contributed on CNN. I know he contributed on a plethora of news networks. He's based out of Philadelphia or whatever, but I never paid attention to what he talks about. And he's a very educated brother. But something that why I didn't gravitate to the way he speaks and things, and it's something that I got to work on myself also, is that he has like a way that he doesn't convey the message clearly. So it makes it harder for you to understand the message. It ain't a stutter, but it's like you could tell he's thinking. And a lot of the times, most geniuses and nerds, when they speak, you can tell that they thinking because they'll stop, they'll start thinking, they'll be talking fast, and they'll start talking slow, and they'll be all over the place. It's because that's how their mind is operating. So that let me know that he was a smart brother or whatever. And this guy Coleman Hughes. So as I was reading his book, I'm just laying out the playing field before we get to the video of them disagreeing about reparations and the conversation about reparations. So Coleman Hughes, I took a clip from the audio version that I was listening to and I made it and created it for y'all because I wanted to see what y'all thought about this and how y'all feel about this. I think this is a smart way of looking at things.
If the pencil went through, you were legally white. If it didn't, you were legally colored. However more enlightened we believe ourselves to be, and we are in many ways, our methods of classifying people by race are equally absurd. We just can't see it because we take our conventions for granted. We cringe when we hear old recordings of people describing Asians as yellow and Native Americans as red. Then we proceed to talk about black, brown, and white people with a straight face, as if the generations past were simpletons with respect to racial classification, but we're far superior. A critic might agree with this point, but draw the conclusion that we need better categories. The problem isn't with racial classification in general, they might say. The problem is with the specific race categories we've chosen to adopt. The solution is to adopt better categories, to draw better lines, not to jettison racial classification altogether. This objection fails to understand the depth of the problem. Even if it were possible to create rational racial categories, which it isn't, those categories still would not map onto the things that we should really care about, namely addressing poverty, disadvantage, and disparities of luck.
You know what's crazy about that is that it made me think of who created these categories, like calling Mexican people brown, calling African Americans black, calling Caucasian individuals white, calling the Japanese people yellow people, and all of that. Who simplified it and who agreed that that is something that is okay to be done? Because that is a low level of thinking. We need to identify as what we originally identified as. You know, the people from this specific land, the people that is, somebody tried to create this color thing so they can remove our history and we will not know who we really are, because when you know who you really are, you're empowered. That's just my perception. So I like that take. I got more clips from him too, and then he he educated me on something that Martin Luther King said about black supremacy, and I'm going to read that to y'all also after we get through with the debate. But you know, Coleman Hughes is 29 years old. He's not affiliated with either party. Dr. Marc Lamont Hill is a Democrat or whatever, so that's something that is interesting. And this young guy is 29. So we're going to listen to both of these brothers' ideology on reparations, and we're going to chop it up, man. Thank y'all for tuning in to my show. Hit the like button to help me trigger the algorithm. Thank y'all so much.
More than 40 years in the making, the Slavery Reparations Bill, known as H.R. 40, is making its way to the House floor. But the historic measure faces an uphill battle in the gridlocked Senate. The disagreement within the black community regarding reparations crystallized on Juneteenth, 2019, when a House Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing on the bill. The voice leading the charge against reparations on that day was Coleman Hughes, as he called the bill a moral and political mistake.
Black people don't need another apology. We need safer neighborhoods and better schools. We need a less punitive criminal justice system. We need affordable health care. And none of these things can be achieved through reparations for slavery. And the obligation of citizenship is not transactional. It's not contingent on ancestry. It never expires, and it can't be paid off. For all these reasons, Bill H.R. 40 is a moral and political mistake. Thank you.
Joining me now is Coleman Hughes. He's the host of Conversations with Coleman. It's a podcast that he hosts. Coleman, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started right away with this question of opposing the idea of reparations. You talk about it as a moral mistake as well as a political mistake. What's the moral mistake here?
The moral mistake is that obviously when the victims of a historical crime are still alive, there is a moral obligation of the perpetrators to pay reparations. When we're talking about, so for instance, it would be a morally necessary, in my opinion, as I said at the hearing, to pay reparations for Jim Crow to survivors of the Jim Crow system. Now, on the other hand, when you're talking about the median Black American being around 35 years old or so, born in the 80s, is there a moral obligation to take money from one group of people and give it to that person for a crime that happened 200 years ago? That's a very different situation, and one in which you have to consider whether it's politically wise to do that, whether it actually serves the interests of the community that is suffering from many different problems in the present that need to be solved. To frame that solution as reparations, saying essentially blaming a group of people that don't feel connected to the crime because it was so long ago, right? So that's what I mean by a moral and political mistake.
I have to stop him for a minute though, because this is important for me to say, and I'm gonna make it quick and I'm gonna get back to the video. My main purpose for saying that reparations is necessary is because generational wealth was created by the people who was conducting slavery. You know, they was creating generational wealth while our people was trying to get a next meal. So these people has reaped the benefits, and their children is going to reap the benefits from slavery. We are not in a position, even though a lot of Black people are getting financially stable, because I just realized that it's 2 million Black millionaires in America and 13 Black billionaires. I just recently did that research. So to me, I ain't saying that we're hindered or anything though, but think about the wealth gap, the generational wealth gap. Who don't want to leave something to their people when they're dead and gone? How you're going to be capable of that when you're still trying to get back to a position of financial? A lot of people ain't even financial literate, but financial gain and success to be able to set your people up when these people are still reaping the rewards, the harvest from slavery, and they still like holding funds back, holding opportunities back from people that they don't feel as if is of their value. Let's let them cook.
So there's a few leaps there that I want to unpack with you for a minute. So you start by saying that it would be a morally proper thing to do if the victims of a crime were still alive. And then when we get to these people born in the 1980s, you're saying, well, if the redress comes through them, if we give it to their great grandchildren, it produces a political sort of challenge and crisis for the community, if I understand you correctly. And it may not be the proper way to address the needs of the broader community. Understood. I hear that argument. That still doesn't address why it would be not moral to do so, right? If for example, there were a person who was enslaved and slavery ends and they have a child, just one generation, just a child who was denied access to housing, health care, and in general American prosperity because their parent was a slave, an enslaved African. Would you, just in that example, would you say that it would be improper to give reparations to them?
Yeah, so that I'm not. I think in that case, probably it would be proper, and obviously it's a case by case basis. But the closer you are to the crime, the more plausible and morally required it is to give somebody reparations. And you always have to take into account the other side of the equation here, right? If my grandfather does something to if your grandfather did something horrible to my grandfather, I couldn't necessarily come to you and expect you to pay me directly, right? That would be immoral. So obviously, the closer you are to the crime, you're exactly right. The more necessary, the more morally required it is, and it's a damn shame that reparations were not paid to recently freed slaves and their children. Unfortunately, it is a different situation we're dealing with today, and you can't. It's not that just because reparations were due and never paid for a historical crime does not necessarily mean that the great great grandchildren, say, can demand of the great great grandchildren of the perpetrators that you pay me now. It's tragic, but a multiracial society with a history like we do cannot survive if the principle we're gonna abide by is we're not only solving our crimes, but we're trying to solve all of the crimes of history and litigate
Yeah.
the oppression that has gone on in this country in the present.
So two things. One, the reason I was making that point about the one generation is because then you're not actually rejecting the idea of paying future generations as such. You're simply saying we have to. It's about the level of proximity to the harm that was done. What reparations advocates have been doing since the end of slavery is demonstrating the proximity of the harm. That means that whether it's 1865 or 1965 or 2020, there is considerable empirical data to show that slavery, the cost of slavery, the price of slavery, the impact of slavery continues to be felt by black people. And so while there may be a greater generational gap in terms of education, housing, healthcare, et cetera, we still see a considerable relationship between the harm and the violence of slavery and the impact it's had on multiple generations. And then the second thing you say, and I want you to respond to both of these, I want to give you space to respond to both of these, is this idea that we are somehow going to the grandchildren of people who were harmed and saying we're going to take care of it by going to the grandchildren of people who did the harm. That frames this as that frames reparations as this idea of going to white people and asking them to give money to black people. The idea of reparations is not that. That's not the claim made by anybody who's advocating for reparations. That's not the demand, that's not the request, and that's not the analysis that's being offered. The idea here is that the institutions that were created out of slavery, whether it's the insurance industry, whether it's the banking industry, whether it's certain railroad companies, or whether it is many universities. All of these things were born out of the institution and the violence and the crisis of slavery. And those institutions continue to live, they continue to thrive, and they continue to reproduce inequality. And so the idea here is not to go hat in hand to random white people and give their money to random black people. It's to analyze a system that has given power and privilege to those institutions, and also that has created a gap in opportunity between black folk and white folk. And the demand and the ask that's being made is of the institution. It's of the very government which was built on the exploited labor of enslaved African people. And so I would reject the characterization of reparations as you do, and rather see this as a way of, as we quite literally analyze it as, repairing the damage that was done. That's the idea here.
Okay, so two points to respond to there. The first is the idea that yes, slavery was technically long ago in terms of years, but the harm has persisted, and that can be shown in empirical data. So I think it's a lot more complicated than that. And listen, I know this is not a popular opinion, but my ancestors were slaves in this country, as most black peoples were. And I think there's a degree to which people born today are appropriating the struggles of our ancestors. And if you think about it, consider, for instance, hypothetically, a Jewish person born in the 90s. To what extent does the Holocaust impact him? If he's going to go around and say that he's struggling because of the Holocaust, I think a lot of people would be very skeptical of that. They would say, maybe your parents, maybe your grandparents, but there's a certain amount of removal from in years from.
That was a horrible comparison because those Jewish individuals received reparations and continue to receive reparations. And I want to touch on a few points, and I'm going to let the video play for a longer time. You know, the HR 40 bill, that wasn't initiated by the people. 40 acres and a mule wasn't initiated by the people. That was initiated by the government telling that they was going to repair the damage that was done. You know, you tell us that you're going to do one thing and you do the opposite. You tell the people, a multitude of people, that you're going to do one thing, you're going to repair the damage that was done, and you never do it. It's like you're playing with us. I don't like to be played with, pause. That's just not who I am. So I really don't trust the government, period, in totality. he also made it seem as if that the people that's speaking on this is talking about white individuals or dead. That's not true. That's word salad. That's bullshit. To me, I feel as if, the idea isn't the white people. It's the government owes the debt for allowing people to thrive in that system. They owe the debt, not the people. I seen that in my comment section on my Killer Mike and Bill Maher video too. Y'all think I'm gonna give y'all? We don't want nothing from y'all, man. Real talk. It ain't about y'all. Y'all actually are in a similar position, but I'm not gonna get on to that yet. I also feel like it's deeper than slavery. I talked about the experiments that was happening to prisoners in Philadelphia and Alabama and a multitude of cities. I was talking about how we was building communities and they burnt down our communities that hindered us from creating generational wealth. I also feel like civil rights helped them thrive. The government, now I'm not speaking specifically about Caucasian people. I feel like civil rights integrated us and it helped them thrive. If we would have stayed separated and had to do what we had to do for our best interests on our own, I feel like we was doing better in the 50s and 60s than we doing now. Welfare, it broke up the family home structure. A lot of people don't feel as if, when you're young, you don't realize how important it is. A lot of people feel as if like my mom took care of me. I celebrate my mom on Father's Day and all that dumb shit. But when you break up the family structure, you ruin a child. It's ruining a child. And I grew up in a community with the moms raising a whole bunch of boys, and it wasn't no men in the whole community. 140 something apartments, and it was just all women getting government assistance, taking care of their sons, and that hurt. You know what I'm saying? That was a bad thing to me, and I'm an '80s baby, so that was around the time when welfare and all of that old type of stuff was really coming into fruition from after the bills and all of the things was passed. So I think it's beyond slavery. That's all I'm gonna say. Let me let them cook.
From the crime that makes those kinds of claims less plausible. And that's just my opinion. I understand that that's controversial, but I don't see how it's not true. And then on the second point,
okay, can I pause you on the first one just for clarity, and then I'll give you space to answer the second one. On the first one, as a matter of fact, let's do this. Let's pause and take a commercial. The thing I had planned to do next, I'm not going to do. This is also for my producers. I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about those 2 points you just made. All right, everybody stay with me. We got much more coming up. Coleman Hughes here on Black News Tonight. Welcome back to Black News Tonight. I'm continuing my conversation with Coleman Hughes. We're talking about reparations and whether they are both morally necessary, and hopefully in this last bit we'll talk a little bit about whether they're politically viable. This idea, though, that black people are far enough away from the damage of it that it's no longer a reasonable complaint or reasonable critique of the system to say that that slavery or the impact of slavery it still lingers today. Again, that is contradicted by the facts on the ground. There is a direct relationship between mass incarceration. If we look at the pattern from the end of slavery to the liberation, the emancipation of slaves, to the creation of black codes, to the creation of the convict lease system, to the creation of the modern prison industrial complex, to the creation of laws to fortify and fill the prisons, we see direct correlations, just as one example, between slavery and mass incarceration, and that has turned into a systemic problem. When you look at things like that, it seems hard to say that there's no connection between the slavery and what we're dealing with today. But I guess my question for you is, if you knew, if we could empirically determine and persuade you that reparations, if I could persuade you that slavery had a direct impact on the lives of black people today and the prosperity chances of black people today, would you then be pro reparations?
that's a good question. So I think obviously the past influences the present in all kinds of complicated ways. I'm not denying that that's true. What I am saying is that when you look at the specifics, usually slavery gets blamed for things that often had nothing to do with slavery. So you mentioned mass incarceration. I would have to disagree. I mean, mass incarceration was a phenomenon that started in the late 70s. Before the late 70s, there was no mass incarceration. And it happened for complicated reasons relating to, bad incentives on the part of prosecutors, tough on crime laws. There's a lot of people still alive today that are to blame for mass incarceration. We can't just blame the legacy of slavery. There are people to be held accountable, and I do think this is one way in which the simplistic sort of blaming everything on slavery in a weird way actually lets a lot of politicians that are doing bad things right now off of the hook. So that's just one example to give here. And then to your second question of if you could persuade me that there is, I think there's no doubt that slavery has had some impact. It's really hard to say how much, and everyone's individual family story of coming out of slavery into the present is unique, and how different families dealt with it. It's very hard to paint with a broad brush about the extent to which any given person's life trajectory in the present was influenced by slavery. That's a very complicated question.
Well, but that's why we're offering systemic analysis, right? That's what we're saying. It's not about the individual case. It's saying that there are structural factors and structural determinants here, that the reality of black folk writ large is affected by this. But just to be clear, and for time's sake, if I'm understanding you correctly, there actually is no amount of correlation that you would find persuasive enough to support reparations. It's not as if you knew that black people's lives were directly impacted by this, you still would say no to reparations. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would, because even if you admit slavery is the root source of the problem, that doesn't imply necessarily that reparations is going to solve those problems. That's actually a fallacy. So for example, if reparations were paid today, tomorrow we would still be living in a country, I would argue, that has, unsafe neighborhoods, dysfunctional public schools, poor healthcare. All the problems related to poverty would still exist, and we would be left saying, well, whether they were caused by slavery or not, let's be solution oriented. What does it mean to be problem solvers here, right? Rather than to be stuck in the past in this quixotic quest to have some kind of moral absolution, right? Some closure that is, in my view, not practical, not in the cards, and not going to do anything to solve the kinds of issues people are waking up with every day.
So there's a few things. I mean, it sounds like you're saying that reparations wouldn't stop or wouldn't fix many of the other problems we have in society. That seems like an odd argument.
Yes. Well,
I hear you.
It wouldn't even fix the problem that it's alleged to fix, which is to sort of heal America's soul on the issue of slavery. I don't even think it would do that, let alone solve any of the problems.
But that's not what's alleged.
People are actually.
But hold on. That's fair. But Coleman, that's not what's being argued here, right? The reparations movement is not saying give black people reparations to heal America's soul. I'm not particularly interested in America's soul. I'm interested in my pockets. I'm interested in my community. I'm interested in creating the capacity for black wealth, for black institutions. And so this isn't some abstract moral project for America or fight for America's soul. I would argue America ain't got one. The real issue here is, will this be a proper form of redress? If you take my money and I ask for it back, and you say, well, I would give your money back, but you're just going to spend it poorly anywhere. You're still going to be broke after I give it back. That's not a persuasive argument for not giving me what's mine. The argument for reparations is that it's owed to us. This isn't an act of philanthropy or largesse. This isn't a favor. This is what is owed. And then after you give us what we owe, we will have the capacity to do what is best for our community. We'll have the opportunity to institution build, to produce intergenerational wealth, not in some sort of narrow capitalist way, but the idea that we can at least support one another, that we can build things for ourselves. And in doing so, that doesn't mean that we forfeit our citizenship. It doesn't mean that we're not still supposed to get safer neighborhoods. It doesn't mean that we're not supposed to get housing and health care. White people get that without reparations, right? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't get high quality schools. White people get that without reparations. The idea here is reparations is to make us whole again, right? Or to at least attempt to repair the damage done. And you're right, maybe nothing will be complete. But the fact that it isn't perfect doesn't mean it shouldn't be done at all. I'm gonna give you the last word too. I want to make sure you have an opportunity to respond to all of this. And the other piece of this is you say that it's not viable. It seems to me that reparations has never been more viable. It's never seemed more likely than it does right now. Whether it's HR 40 advancing, whether it's people not just considering whether to study slavery, but to actually examine particular proposals about it. Whether we're talking about the fact that mainstream politicians are talking about this, you've written about it, and I know you have some critique of it, but it's a conversation that didn't happen 20 years ago. So it seems to me that we're right on the precipice of something major. But I want to give you, I have literally 1 minute left, and I want to give it to you to offer your response.
Sure. So let's be very concrete. A few months ago, maybe you covered this on your show, but the mayor of Oakland announced a program to give $500 a month to low-income Black families, right, and not low-income white families. My critique of that program is, yes, obviously we have to find ways beyond just giving cash, but improving the true drivers of wealth, which is not disposable income, but human capital and knowledge and skills and so forth. We have to find ways of addressing those issues for America's poor of all colors, right? But what does it mean for a multiracial, diverse country going into the future with the idea that we can have policies that are only for certain people based on skin color and ancestry, and not actually based on class, poverty, and wealth, right? Because if that's the problem we're trying to solve, and I think we would both agree, at least that is certainly a big problem, right? Poverty is really at the root of what we're talking about here. Poverty and dysfunction and opportunity and wealth. Then why not just base our policies on that? It more effectively targets disadvantage for people of all colors. It is less politically divisive because nobody feels blamed. Nobody feels like they're being blamed for things that happened hundreds of years ago. It's more sustainable, it's more popular, and it's more ethical. So to me, I'm comparing reparations to a policy that is class-based and seeing that it is just wanting in many ways by comparison.
You know, that was a good conversation to me. I feel like that was a great conversation. But I have another video I want to pull up. I want to read the material. I'm gonna give y'all my take, but I want to read the material from a part of his book, The Gaslighting of Martin Luther King. I want to read this little section right here where Dr. Martin Luther King talks about black supremacy. It seems as if, you know, that brother doesn't want to see black people get reparations regardless. Even though I was just Googling, when y'all see me looking down on the show, I was Googling, it's bills in effect that the Congress is working on right now. They just haven't even passed them. So they're talking about reparations within the Congress and the Senate and all of that. It's just that they're not publicly talking about it. So what I took really from that conversation is he's more invested in talking about class than race. I realized that people that is really tapped into America and American society, it really isn't about race no more. Caucasian people watching this or white people, whatever y'all consider yourself, they don't, the government and the Senate and the House and all of that, they don't care about y'all no more. They care about the rich, the poor, and trying to remove the middle class. It really is about class. It's really not about race, even though race is a monetizable asset. And I got a question for y'all in the comment section because I wanted to do a whole show based around this though, but I didn't have the time to pull this up or whatever though. But what is more monetized in the world right now? God's gifts to the world or racism? Because both of them has been monetized at an all-time high. And it's crazy. To me, I feel like God's natural resources, that's what I want to say. I had to find my notes. God's natural resources or racism. Which one has been monetized the most, man? Because, you know, oil, water, gold, land, crops, airwaves, uh, agriculture, timber, minerals, land. It's just Ridiculous. This was what was in my notes. That is the natural resources. What I just read. It's a $1 billion market. Something that he gave to the humans to be able to use for free. Who thought to monetize God's natural resources? Then when I think about racism, the prison industrial complex, media and politics creating outrage and tension to drive clicks, ratings, and political campaigns, for sales, housing and lending discrimination, corporate DEI, cultural appropriation. It's weird. I don't know which one is more monetized, but I would like to hear y'all thoughts in the comment section. Another thing that he said, he suggests solution based things instead of reparations. And Marc Lamont Hill said that I feel like America is soulless. I can't help but agree with that because it's like, it's a soulless country. They don't care about their people. We see what's going on in LA right now, even though that's not our people. But we see the foolishness that's going on that our people are having to deal with that lives there because their leadership has failed them in Los Angeles. Real talk. Let me read this to y'all though, man. This is King's take on white supremacy. I'm gonna get to reading. Let us be dissatisfied until that day when nobody will shout white power, when nobody will shout black power, but everybody will talk about God's power and human power. In an effort to achieve freedom in America, Asia, and Africa, we must not try to leap from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thus subverting justice. We must seek democracy and not the substitution of one tyranny for another. Our aim must never be to defeat or humiliate the white man. We must not become victimized with the philosophy of black supremacy. Black supremacy is dangerous as white supremacy, and God is not interested merely in the freedom of black men and brown men and yellow men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. The problem is not a purely racial one with Negroes set against whites. In the end, it is not a struggle between people at all, but between justice and injustice. Nonviolence resistance is not aimed against oppressors, but against oppression. Under its banner, consciousness, not racial groups, are enlisted. The important thing about man is not his specificity, but his fundamentum, not the texture of his hair or the color of his skin, but the quality of his soul. You know, I have to agree with that. But we have people in the world. I hear a lot of people that talk about taking stuff back. We got to do this and do that. This is tough because when I was interviewing Judge Joe Brown, he talked about how much black power got accomplished and why Dr. Martin Luther King was in fear of black power. This is tough, man. This is tough. That's an important piece. I'm gonna have to clip this part up and make it his whole own podcast because black supremacy. Let's think about that for a moment. What would that look like? Would it be the same thing as white supremacy? Why do we have to feel to be superior over another race? Then in that piece, he also talked about the color of people's skin, yellow, brown, black men. God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. Is this the reason, like, we on the planet in general to not view each other as opposites and just love each other regardless of what we may look like or what it's just weird to me that people have to identify with something and they need to identify with something to have something against somebody else when we're all humans at the end of the day. Even though I'm getting away from the reparations talk because that's what this guy will have you doing if you listen to his book. To me, I feel it's a debt that's owed. I feel like it's beyond slavery in closing. And I feel like that was an important piece to read right there about Martin Luther King's take on black supremacy, because he wasn't for it. He wasn't for black power and all of that. He had a Christian ideology that he thought about all people. And he was the leader of our people, and he thought about all people. And that's the way that a lot of people should be thinking, because oneness and it'll be healthy if all people could win. But the nature of the people on this planet, that ain't how it is, man. It's about violence and fear to obtain the power that you want to obtain. I'm gonna leave y'all with another clip from Coleman Hughes' book. Thank y'all for tuning in. On this clip, he's talking about a social construct. I highly appreciate y'all, man. Peace, love, plenty, abundance. Make sure you go get you some money, and I'm gone.
With others. And if our minds were suddenly wiped clean of the concept of a week, we might not reinvent it in exactly the same way. This concept, in other words, is a social construct. The concept of race falls into a third category. It's neither completely natural nor completely socially constructed. It's a social construct inspired by a natural phenomenon. To take a simple example, consider the concept of a month. Months don't exist in nature. They don't track anything in the natural world. Nothing in the cosmos begins when February does or ends when March does. We could just as easily end March a day later and give April an extra day. Or we could get rid of March altogether and distribute its days among the remaining 11 months. On the other hand, months are clearly inspired by something that does exist in nature: the lunar cycle. It's no accident that months are similar in length to the lunar cycle, which averages 29.5 days. The words moon and month even derive from the same root. So what is a month? It's not a natural phenomenon because it doesn't track anything in the natural world with precision. Therefore, it must be a social construct. Yet, unlike most social constructs, it owes its very existence and basic characteristics to a natural phenomenon. It is thus a kind of hybrid, a social construct inspired by a natural phenomenon. The concept of race is similar to the concept of a month. It too is a social construct inspired by a natural phenomenon. What natural phenomenon is the concept of race inspired by? Tens of thousands of years ago, several large populations of humans migrated out of Africa, where all humans first evolved. Africans, of course, remained in Africa. Once out of Africa, these populations remained isolated from one another, separated by mountains, oceans, or great distances, as a result of living and reproducing in unique environments for tens of thousands of years.
The Trevor Jackson Podcast.